Would anybody like the link to the stream? Everybody's good?
Oh, I was like,
Okay. If you could just write your email down on like a piece of paper or something. Or actually, yeah, that would probably be easier. Here you go.
You mean just like share a link with email?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
I didn't
just
see it
type
on
it.
the side. Oh, my bad. Okay, here. And you can just send it. I don't know how to send it.
Okay, are you managing the stream?
Yes.
So what do you want us to do for cross-X?
For cross-X, because we're all in person. Actually, I'm just gonna try and find a setup that encapsulates everybody in the stream.
Awesome.
Like, I'm not gonna try and just get it on one team and then move it around. But if that's not available, then I will do that, presumably. I just don't want to have to do that.
Yeah.
Are y'all gonna be speaking from there
We can
or
speak
here?
from wherever makes it easier for you.
Because if y'all speak from
Yeah, I can do that.
there, but if y'all speak from there, actually, I can move this over and then put the camera kind of like this, and I can get everybody. So I'll just do this then.
Are there any seniors in this debate?
Chris is a senior. I'll stop.
Is your phone out?
I
Love show choir?
do love show choir.
That's mine. That's mine. I'm sorry about that.
Rock, jazz, rock, disco, show tunes, and patriot pieces.
Oh my God.
So it's perfect.
Show choir is the move.
No,
Show choir is in really into Glee in like 2008, like the rest of the family. Peter.
Everyone's good on this one. Yeah.
Smashing that start button. Speeches. What is the message in the scouting you don't say, did we make it?
I don't know what they did, so go off, I guess.
I'm ready.
Sorry.
Okay.
We're good? All three judges? Yeah. Good. Right. Advantage one is inequality in social sportsmanship and priorities labor markets less than all two churches and first folks that interest in labor and single labor would be the agency hosted a workshop where the top officials suggest labor related antitrust indictments and recent pretrial wins under sport DOJ targeting criminal labor American misconduct piece of evidence suggest labor remain top of mind for antitrust agencies in 2022 cater opposites to commitment to labor competition concept the FTC's rebel against commitment to scrutinize any purchases that have been taken into effect on labor markets DOJ's offensive to investigate no coaching which we've seen agreements continue to ramp up and regulation competitive competition in labor markets has become a top priority for 2022 agencies seem poised to continue aggressively pursuing labor misconduct but current enforcement excludes franchise no post agreements, lack of consensus results in conflicting corporate and uncertainty. Martino and Harold 21 DOJ and FTC issued 940 no agreements violating antitrust laws that remain in several pockets of disagreement and franchise agreements hit rule reason applies for litigation financially and practical proving well mentioned government recommendation and political certified class action federal courts have taken at least 4 views held in franchises and franchisees are capable of conspiring because they can price single enter supervised courts included, per se only apply in number of courts applied to the precinct courts. As written in the legal test, any confusion about federal case law or enforcement history about the appropriate test usually arguable, reasonable, generally applies to franchise agreements, attorney general's office, filing of these brief argument per se rule should apply. Franchise no coach agreements, suppress economic growth. The plan is critical to wages and mobility. Bargain Warren and Booker 17. Collision between franchises, suppress wage and job mobility. Competitive labor market is critical to our economy. The labor market is working efficiently, works in business, benefit from workers. We are concerned about no good between franchises and franchisees. Franchises prohibit franchisees from recruiting, hiring. These limit workers' ability to move and translate productivity, wages, and benefits. Economists explain the agreements 58% use anti-competitive no poach. No poach agreements to drive inequality and macroeconomic stagnation. Antitrust competition is key. Edgar 21. Standard overview of tangible effects on the economy. No poach agreements suppress wage and restricting mobility. Antitrust encourages free markets, per se, encourage robust competition. Problem with labor market is less competition. Lack of mobility contribute to long-term macroeconomic trend of stagnant wages and rising inequality. No poach agreements to suppress setting mechanisms restricting competition. Needles in place to suppress wages without fear of them leaving agreements between franchises and facilitating opportunities for additional collusion. Franchisees in a circus position to face wages limit the ability to respond to inadequacies or changes in the workplace. Employers experience less pressure to offer competitive wages. Benefits allow employers to keep labor costs low at the expense of employees. Worker mobility increases productivity, wages, commerce, and innovation. All grow the economy. Phillips 19. Decline of labor mobility is bad for a country. When you can leave, you do have greater leverage to improve conditions to be a higher wage. Decline of labor mobility is slow growth wage. Solution is competition, mobility, saves commerce, and innovation, reduces inequality. People can move to areas of benefit, growth being shared, mobility, less federal economic policies, work better, increasing productivity of business, and growing per pie. They are the main cause of wage stagnation. Coupled with 19 no wage agreements. Eliminate threats to take training for another franchisee. The employer worker is more competitive position to negotiate salary. Franchisee willing to pay higher wage plus cost for middle original franchisee instead of a raise wage. Avoid losing money spent on training evidence and wages are not cost by other factors. Ultimately, decrease competitiveness and suppress wages and pushing agreements. Explain less competitive labor market, lack of wage growth, growing inequality drives diversionary nationalism, makes war and assaults of love and nationalism. Scarce inequality states engage in nationalism and thinking when inequality increases inequality is a stimulus for national sentiments, nuclear weapons. Service Department of Defense states may prevent national pride, discontent, discontent, inequality. This can lead to hostility towards minorities. Nationalism is a cause of war and more national pride. And more realistic foreign posture, more interventionist role. Inequality should be especially taken to national conflict. Inequality erodes institutional capacity, causes extinction. Schmidt and June 21 questions long-term performance depends on quality of institutions for preparedness, health, foreign policy, science, good institutions, reduce existential risk. Inequality reduces institutional quality. Inequality leads to really capture, reduce long-term quality of institutions. Institutions less likely to be characterized by long-term trajectories. Less investment in public goods, really capture, increase existential risk. High inequality reduce social capital and trust important for effective good provision. Inequality reduce capacity to effectively transform the large-scale social societies with lower inequality, exhibit greater resilience to external shocks, conflicts, reduce human induced existential risk, global head cyber to global isolation, polarization, increased risk of conflict. Evidence suggests inequality, increased great polarization, play role in hitting populist standards, selective populist politicians less cooperative, and prefer more conflictual and nationalistic policy. Inequality is the biggest central link to growth. Stiglitz 14. Inequality is likely to get worse. Optimism may be wrong. Inequality cannot be just the top or those who have made innovations there. Rent seeking, carrying a larger share of the power than enhancing the power rent seeking results in pressure gain, but not those makes money by contrasting output and decline of the wages. Increasing wealth does not increase by economy, it reduces master the wealth and assets being less. In reproductive capital, low interest rates increase assets, business of real capital, is easy to generate bubbles. That idea, money trickles down to discredit, to trickle down fallacy, lists the top cedar income increase with about a 99.9% decrease in economic system. The middle delivers for the top is failed when misconception is the top of creators is fundamentally wrong. With job system and inequality to the level the characteristics the US is bad. For growth stability and economic efficiency, our methods inequality marked by lower growth and greater instability. GDP is not enough what matters. Is whether long-term growth is sustainable and living standards, commerce and policy makers need outlooks on the top. You need income inequality increases citizen security, equality weakening demand. This is the bottom of the larger fraction of their income, and then the top those one of the bottom are previous many like access to nutrition, education, like countries long-term process are put interpret inequality is unfair out of a corrupt system, or if the credit corrupt system decline causes war over helps traditional barriers to complex and around pop-up 19 point of crisis going depends on the increased possibility of watching military conflict on crisis is better control more for the military conflict in World War II. We almost make our government fail of makers manage global economy for the big economy, easing low interest rates and their crisis force for the last is likely to have economic stress prevent unrest, conflict more insecurity, increased social tensions and turmoil, especially when the growing concurrent of this roof will world effect nothing but tension losing exacerbate tensions leading to conflicts leaders reverse policies associated with the causes global liberalization, economic conflicts, financial crisis lead to military competition, even if unattended. Data proves the link between economic decline and inequality and war. Teaching last hour 21, the link between financial crisis and deterioration and peace has been found by several studies. More table reveals correlation between crisis and war. Similar by stress link between financial crisis and collapse. The war and economic crisis can cause global conflict, tensions, trade, and turning. Concerns regarding the partition and teacher. This was found in World War II. The change link between the economy and peace come to force. The plan eliminates franchise exceptions, scheme employment competition shaper. 19 opening agreements and franchises operate in the same way as franchise systems. Agreements setting wages and restrict work mobility. This work is not opposing. Agreements and franchise could be per se illegal regarding the categorization of coaches. It should be banned. Franchises are already capable of conspiring and hiring. Franchises can be viewed as independent companies. Companies not compete our competitors, and employment is therefore a level for competitors not to compete. Individual franchises compete for employers. Economists propose to putting uniformly favor those franchises. A per se approach is appropriate. No pushing agreement fairly sharpen the current national franchise harm worker by restricting mobility. Which the working conditions of per se rules inappropriate. Per se illegality escalated key to clarity, saves resources, and causes companies to change behavior. Edgar 21 per se rule less pressure preserve resources and avoid expensive litigation. Plaintiffs do not have to counter costly and economic investigation. Achieves judicial economy strong and experienced person, clear stance on franchise and agreement system can modify practice accordingly. That's key to success of national class action lawsuits. Hampton saying 21 force and I modified the amount of motion to certify class of fast food workers that no push provision in franchise agreements violated Sherman court rule of reason. Applies to franchise agreements for rejection per se, having determined rule of reason applies to corresponding rule of reason. Rule raised individual issues precluding class certification. Court focus on requirements. Literature shows substantial effect relevant market rejected theory workers sold and labor in one national market decision underlies difficulties plaintiffs face in certifying class in its areas. So decisions call the question whether nationwide class can be certified in no push cases. Cases illustrate roadblocks facing plaintiffs under real reason increased frustrated ability to show predominance. Antitrust class actions are the only way to compensate workers for losses and deter exploitation. Land 16 class actions essential in ensuring damages, protect consumers from arbitrary filthy pricing, permitting citizens to combine research to see more powerful litigation costs from that class action violators that inflict widespread economic harm have little to do with the trouble agency because class action only way for victims to compensation totally significant. Other state benefits for that class action affects victim compensation reduced dramatically. Thus, the plan, the United States federal government should substantially increase prohibitions on franchise no coach agreements. The advantage too is DOJ credibility. DOJ promised prosecution of no coach, but it's failed in bringing criminal cases and getting per se rulings. Increased scrutiny means expanding the scope of antitrust is key to preserve DOJ credibility and resources. Failing at all 21 division claim it would criminally prosecute no coaching, but it's long tolerated certain forms of arrangements until elections. Folks and different will testify no coach. Like getting consumed in time, it will be enough of that form. So the solicitor general filed the motion to dismiss raise several charges division. Two bar bills really display similarities in harm. Now, the clarity upon which criminal laws thrive in a world in which division successfully expands persecution and people to consider church enforcement for other arrangements is a pivotal moment. Extra scrutiny. After consequence for future companies division seen a whole liable. Current DOJ enforcement contradicts previous guidance and legal consensus. Backlash. Politicizes the department and undermines credibility. Edgar 21 DOJ argued well established in personal does not apply in franchise sector position foreign spaces. Defendants arguments DOJ may articulate position. Later advocate for different approach to franchise sector argued case by case basis. DOJ received criticism. Key players due to disagreement. Courts were elected. A proud to pronouncement regarding standard of review. DOJ will misguide courts and discourage plaintiffs from challenging agreements that House Energy Division's decision. Resorting the state's attorney and FCC numerous sectors have rejected DOJ's position. Subcommittee argued DOJ's decision when creative protection for franchise reflects those who mishappen. Priorities. DOJ legitimacy is the foundation of liberal democratic governance. Finkelstein on page 22. DOJ puts a unique role in protecting the law. Department's credibility. Prosecutions must be politically neutral, motivated by even-handed enforcement. DOJ is well situated to impart rule of law when department treats compliance as creative, leads to disintegration of applying governance as a whole. Threatens very foundation of democratic governance. Distorts and strengthens the very concept of legality. Democracy solves great power. Wartime in 19. Global pleasure. Democracy. Logic that traffic. World War. Democracy. Christian foundation for world peace and security. Version me. Reach a tipping point. Democracy goes bankrupt. Plunging world to aggression. Nazi since World War II. It solves every impact. Imperfectly more stable than autocracies. Creating 20 billion democratic systems and never going to planning contrary to historical facts. Visionary approaches of autocrats. Open active governments are obligated to answer their citizens who therefore hard time advancing gold agenda democratic elections. That's my speakers are civil resemblance society facilitating innovation for financial markets, making informed decisions of more autocratic regimes. But enforcing on institutionalized political secessions, democracy typically changes in policy autocrats. Our four lines builders will not drastically change these enduring patterns of international affairs and not democratic backsliding in the U.S. spills over diamond 21 democratic global democratic recession morphed into the reverse wave of democratic breakdowns, markets and banning democracy and transition. U.S. democratic anti-democratic movement failure for American democracy be catastrophic would have profound global consequences. Democratic norms spread is why no development will be more gravely damaged. The global democratic cause and the democratic backsliding of its most important champion. Global democratic modeling tells world the alternative is authoritarianism. X-Men 18, the US 50. Democratic values compared to advantage global competition. Americans say liberal democratic values have been capability enhancing sustainable political power, advancing long-term interests. Marxists are less likely to go war against the US sponsored terrorism and experience. Favor of refugees, liberal Marxists share values rooting rule of law, global system, and democratic institutions as far peace. This will secure American advantage by strengthening the global democratic bulwark. US almost 7 times the world. Marxists represents the best test of the liberal rule of law.
Right, we're going to take this in with class.
Yeah.
Oh, there's salt. Sorry. This one will go for it. I'm going to talk about it. You for I'll save this. Right. Yeah. Just actually.
Okay.
All right, stopping at 9:04. All right, all good for process.
Yeah.
All right, let's start off. Who makes the agreements that the app is prohibited?
Franchisers.
Sure. Are these like agreements between franchises or agreements that franchises are writing into contracts with?
They're between franchises and franchises.
So between a company and a franchisee saying, don't poach from like other franchises of the same company.
Do you know how franchise works?
Well, yes, that's
Not
I
everybody,
just
just
explained
like it
how
makes it
franchise
clear.
works. I want to know whether the app is prohibiting agreements between franchisees and franchises. franchise.
Within one company.
Or
So the way that
agreements.
it works.
So to be clear, the app does not prohibit agreements between franchisors or employees and
Let me-
saying.
The way that it works is that the no poach agreements are not like non-compete agreements. Non-competes, I think what you're thinking about, where it's signed by the employee.
Yeah, I just
No
want to
poach
clarify that the
agreements
app
are
does not
they're between
prohibit
the
non-compete.
franchisor and the franchisee and within individual franchisees. So McDonald's will say like, if you want to open a McDonald's, Henry and Margaret, then you need to put this agreement in your contracts that says that you can't hire other McDonald's workers and people who work at another McDonald's, if you two open one, can't come work at our McDonald's. So the agreement is in the contract between the franchisor, the franchisee, and in between individual franchisees. So
Yeah,
like you
sure,
and
but
I
to
can come
clarify,
together
post-
and say, let's make
Like,
it a agreement.
we all understand how franchises work, but to clarify, post-app, like, your McDonald's employees still can't go work other places because of the non-compete agreements that you put into the contract,
Non-competes
right?
are different. Non-competes
Yeah, and the
are
app
like-
doesn't get rid of those, right?
Because non-competes aren't a problem. First, two things. One,
The app
you
does
keep
not
this
get rid of
question-
non-compete.
Can I answer your question?
I don't think
Are
you
you gonna let
will.
me answer your question? Thank you. The first portion of the app says the DOJ is going broadly after restrictions on labor mobility now. That is our uniqueness argument. That evidence says that the DOJ is going after non-competes, which is different than what you're talking about. Non-competes are not an issue because they're not a barrier to mobility. Non-competes are signed by employees, which is different than a no poach agreement, which is imposed upon them.
So, I'm gonna move on from this, but to be clear, the app says that this isn't an issue because non-competes are not a barrier to mobility.
And they're being
Okay,
broadly
sure. Is
prosecuted.
productivity the main driver of wage inequality?
It's the main driver of wage inequality.
Or is a lack of productivity the main driver of wage inequality?
Other way around. Wage inequality is a driver of lack of productivity.
Okay, sure. Why is it good to increase productivity?
We have both, like the scenario that we've read is an example, because if we don't have productivity, then the economy in the long term.
Well, yeah,
is
but you
less resilient
said,
to
but like
external
the
shocks.
internal link from economy to everything going bad is
When
inequality. You just said that this is a
productivity
product of
decreases,
inequality.
when productivity decreases, it means that we can supply less goods, we can make less things, which is
Well-
two implications. One, it means that prices skyrocket, which is bad, because when wages are suppressed by people who work for franchises, the vast majority of the people who are in the lower income brackets of the economy, they can't afford those goods because decreased productivity means prices go up and they can't afford daily necessities. The second reason why it's bad, and that means that people then aren't contributing to the economy, which holds out the economy, because what matters most is not GDP and how much is getting produced, but the fact that who can buy what's being produced, and that is undermined if people have low wages and they can't, and when production is low, then demand is higher than supply, which is what causes price spikes. People can't afford things.
Okay, we're gonna okay, I'm gonna start the conversation.
I'll take you back.
Yep, yes. I can pull it up what you want.
What round did we do?
Well, it's just,
Yeah, which round is this? I'm gonna press it right now.
it's just.
Which round is it? Where is it?
No, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Which one is it? This?
No, you're right.
We'll be clear what they just.
No, I know.
Yeah,
I know.
no, I can do it. Yeah. I can definitely do that.
One, 2 minutes.
Did you see? Sure. That's right. Yeah.
I'll give it to you during the speech. All right, stop prep 6:53.
Okay, I'll send it. It's 4, advantage 1, advantage 2. There's no disadvantage in the dock because Chris is assembling the cards. That will be sent out after.
So there's 3 off the dock.
Yeah. Just go to the hip scan around. That's the one that's in the cards. Chip around with this. Y'all have it? Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. I'm just gonna go. Good. I don't need to do the thing where it's like, I'm gonna start in 5 seconds.
To be fair, no one should be doing that thing either.
Yeah, this is just go.
It makes no sense.
You're on it.
Okay. The plan must specify details of antitrust reform in these 4 areas: antitrust standards, enforcement remedies, and exceptions. AMC 7 this short commission to study the antitrust landscape, compare her number of programs around efficiency to study all with easy, neither efficient nor desirable to use productively. The commission has this program of focus on every standards of antitrust law enforcement decision remedies and the exceptions, vacancies, 20 issues that's Johnson 20 implementation to issues of it to decide what the details of interest as well as the high level concepts itself. Implementation necessary moderate attention that will invite serious employment unless we expect to address the major reform will occur to fail short of will fall short of the first antitrust laws effectively knocks off the boost and ridiculous solution makes distinction and all ways to the problems based upon not solution that makes the conflicts of world war that dollar did not requires this distinction. There are another tendencies to refer to himself that a separate spirit for a treated individual and causes self reference to motivates to be selfish with compassion with the whole wise civilization will not survive. Humanity can become to go quantity separate the rusher put down the one to see providing the egg means for dispatch with the app the Q and 5 and then restricted role the mobile person with the body being sitting the putting out the down in the body or parent but it's what's called the body unrestricted role the mobile person is able to go to for a long time. This is real. This is me. This is what I am. But it would be better for the unrestricted role the person we build up. The body comes to the 4 great elements found in the mind. This body is for stating 4 the 100 years or what's called the mind by day and process of one thing consists another nutrition sustainable intensive and the medical rest with this is that it's from the rest of that gets from that one is medicine sensation this condensation of that the see through the instructions have no one's going to share with form to share with the share with share fabrications against consciousness dispatches fully released full racer. This knowledge checks out the accountability. The United States federal government should establish a public service and employment program PSC solve economic inequality. This Ray and then 15 million potential workers that likely to program to reverse health labor first chance of the program face 15 the now 31 to every the program have significant poverty rates and bulge of other workers left to family on part the 9.5 million children be left out by the average income gap at some point then $10 something dollars the would have the time to the FTC with the programs would be reduced if everyone had access to jobs especially to keep the network spending the client's tax revenue for the rise would also be a mistake to focus on the cost for the FTC program like considering your economic goods and social costs already about next off is the hedge said the app is wrong this quotes the opposite of FTC experience with course and then imperial much more 10 rates somebody for 18 hedge rates 23 offers well this retelling of which the baked into home these words shop around and contrast into the background these security thinkers not for nothing security the world they many have little to say about the Americans must disastrous wars chaos in the Persian Gulf research and terrorism and then the growing underclass of the working party for U.S. emergency for discounting other countries and during clear not to delta or World War II folks are paradoxical problems the world ordering while being the imperial order it's means laying down the rules of American law as well, exempting itself from other for the Kyoto and ICC for policy establishment, repeats its access to neglecting British vision, and the vision of history portraying a confirmation bias, the norm against imperial aggression is not strong enough to prevent the tendency of Tibet, Vince of Turkey, to grab Cyprus, to the occupation of Palestine, the occupation of Kashmir, and the occupation of East Wars, the occupation of Eastern Europe, the learning of Cyprus, the first day, 25%, piece of the nation's total time of war, whether or not Iraq can, in Libya, assist society with the Republic of Libya, users were not created a little condition for peaceful order. I'm going to mark that Evan said order, and then this card already says sustainability. You can do that later. I'm going to read the transition cards. Head transitions inevitable when its form is not rejection. Makes a soft landing. If I put it left, like shoulder. Then you see declining parts adopted, and we're looking for it. Then nature foreign policy of the retraction national security support is policy of then we're trying to deploy military forces offshore the channels. More global influence US wants unless there's good reason for us to expect a soft landing world moves to polarity to bipolarity Washington adapt to grand trading offshore relative group boys. This military forces offshore about great basket about check the resource policy station. Do you need me to read the no, right? Okay. Advantage 1. Actually, we have 5:30. I'll probably get there. Okay. They have growth backward, 116. Cash system resources lead to balance government committee to gain access to growth that needs to increase military defense spending. This more just may be used to pay for new military engagement with the nations, people engage more conflict, especially the conflict with maybe political and visible administration actually increases MIT trade. As cheap and more rich people are more likely to say the opposite, not somewhat of see differences between high low, except for better ever, and overweighting temporary. We can't read both of these actually. Can we? Yeah. Okay. Strike the Han card for now. The no Shabasher in 15. Policymakers consider redistributing based on the ideas that poor households will give a larger share of full payment evidence suggests that the differences in spending between groups of civic. Oh, actually, I'm not going to read this. I'm going to keep the Han card, scratch all this other stuff. I'm going to advantage too. Okay. Democracy is structurally broken. People become disillusioned with turning to alternatives economics and 18 democratic governments, civil to founders and countries, also was wars before war. Autocracies have been driven out by the most have mostly failed democracy. Democracy eventually sold collapses and to adapt and dysfunction and overreach financial crisis rise of China revealed weaknesses. People became disillusioned. Their model more efficiently. Democracy, the opposite is true. Autocratic leaders more incentive to avoid war. Multiple wars was auto. And three autocratic leaders incentive to avoid war. More sophisticated was a threat to hold on power. Non-conceptual forces are revenue less elastic than taxation based on consent. Fear, triggering social political changes like destroy them. Incentive to remain weak. Military preferred and avoid rather than wage war. Military skill to deal with external enemies and time spent organizing military campaigns away from the other. Duty CPT is alive. So in 18, I'm going to have time for the hedge cards. Results there are consistent across all tests. No credible evidence supporting democracy, the cost of peace, impact of democracy, regardless of how public is measured. Even the evidence for reverse causality based on erroneous research is not pieces of statistical agreement stop describing democracy's own cost of peace. If nations want peace, then democracy will not achieve it. Back to the hedge to said. More retrenchment cards. Revolver retrenchment prevents war from status competition against China. Peaceful rise taken current order war in 17. U.S. interest in avoiding the creation of the deeply resistant Chinese economy. China's status claim for retrenchment avoids antagonizing Beijing because of denial attributes of force and parcel highlights the combination puts out the possibility of empowering modern facilitating China's integration with the reform version of the international order that the U.S. could return to offshore balancing, which would allow it to redeploy the region's only China strategy, launching a war watching control offshore the major cost of radical division strategies in history that causes extinction. That's winner. And then 11 deterioration of U.S. relations with China might provide us with the gathering tension between U.S. and China. The nuclear attacks on China would be released another 10 million Chinese death toll would be a far higher rate of radioactive debris. The war would blood of the sun causing nuclear weapons destroying the overall global family in the year 2000. Expected to see more than double the amount of nuclear weapons that hit the United States. Only we nexus offense rejecting retrenchment does not make catch effective, but it does lead to war. McDonald and 18 rejection of retrenchment would lead to foreign policy with escalating frequency, severity, rising powers would be more likely to call the U.S. block foreign interventions to be more likely to try to require American disputes can spiral into nuclear confrontations, and leaders can make poor decisions whether policymakers will double these dangerous trends and events on outreaches. Hedge is unsustainable and lacks support for necessary to be effective. The app latches onto unipolarity, which risks great power, role, and ensures financial cooperation, which is key to mitigate disease, warming, war, and other nuclear arms races by 18. Can you make this bigger? Okay, the U.S. has sought a unipolar world assumption that the Americans benefit, but many disagree. The nation's power consists not merely of guns, also consists of the public willingness to foreign policy elites have keep proposing intervention. The church little support because this increase because despite public polling suggesting public awareness is sparking conflict in places which have Russian and Chinese governments consider crucial to security, but American people do not consider Ukraine, where the protesters held to repress pro-Russian government for Russia when Putin responded by teaching Crimea, but the country to civilian war unipolarity. This is a greatest danger with China export predicted by 2040. U.S. The China's economy will be 1.5 times as large as America's reducing military shift. As a result, U.S. and China might be pursuing to voice the first will be Taiwan. The people trying to figure out far more about Taiwan than America's use. This creates a vast asymmetry of public will committee 100 declares by substantial margins the U.S. less shielded from over Russia and other apps to attack by electricity given for if it's not faced with insolvency, the current commitment may be through war, risking conflict to dies great powers, SOI, or otherwise chance incorporating elsewhere, never will almost 2 minutes. The has provided crucial to ever mitigating the world's greatest threats, Beijing and Washington cooperating called the world crisis, U.S. China cooperation also proved crucial to Paris, so they use it in Russian diplomacy set to start and exert a nuclear embrace, only great power cooperation can add the serious civil war, only Moscow can deliver concessions that outside great power cooperation is also easing to the crisis on Korean Peninsula. That would also require the chances of war. Only Beijing can do that. Identifies logical unipolarity, which maintains U.S. and try to reduce this influence. Trump was a disastrous response to legitimate discontent. The choice of whether or not to discuss discontent and challenge it in a progressive direction. I'm going to read more link cards about the LAO. Oh, actually, you give me the link cards. What? Just like the LAO cards. Okay. Transition to a multipolar world inevitable presents the The United States has this weak and unsustainable, which presents an opportunity for multiple world order now that the plan reverses it. Otherwise, it risks like power world. The 2017 international leadership, the weakening of international leadership has led to rising tensions, growing unpredictability, nature of global leadership changing, the recognizing U.S. prevailing, but as weakened hegemony demands for a policy which realizes that globalization means interdependence and conceptual leadership. He insisted the U.S. was transformed already the dominant global community of shared interest foundation, already in place against removing interdependence between the EU and the U.S. and that of global order and unipolar of hegemony, security, the practical world politics intact with contradictions, ethnic, religious, and separate clashes, globalization contributed to complex conflict, difficult to demarcate Syria and Ukraine, demonstrated conflicts, and risk of spilling over, causing crises to decline in the government ability of the international system, temporary unipolar order that has gradually led to our coercion with furthermore creating the governance vacuum. The liberal institutional order is now challenged by counterforces to create military political global order, trying to force being able to check U.S. influence. Sorry, I will
We get like a pile 1 and C maybe.
That seems fair.
You send out the cards. I never.
All right, send those.
I'm pretty sure this is everything I read on my computer.
Okay, so Chris's email is just the hedge TA from the OG 1 and C, right?
Well, mine should have binary quarter and controller.
Do you want to just make a compiled one and see with like everything in it?
My one has everything except the 3 cards that are in
Okay.
this doc.
That's gonna work.
Okay, that's
I have not got it. That's the whole.
It is set. It has been set. So.
Okay, C.
Okay.
So we're gonna open that. We're gonna open it. We're gonna take a second break. Do this real quick, send it to each piece. It's the ultimate. Okay, stop prep. We have 8:40. Ready?
Yeah.
Question on everyone's mind. We did not read a hedge impact. What's the link?
Okay, so the last piece of evidence I read, so one, we're going to make a broader argument about DAF's investment in the liberal order and why that's linked. Two,
Wait,
last,
what? The app's investment in the liberal order is linked, so it's a critique.
well, the second advantage, the Finkelstein evidence is like, it's like the DOGA, like is key to the rule of law, and you made arguments about
And we
why
said-
that legitimacy is
Have you read
for
parts of
global
the-
democracy. You said democratic blacksliding is
I agree. We linked to democracy bet. We're going to bite the bullet on that. What is the link to hedge between either democracy or rule of law or anything?
Our argument is that the way that the AF has described the status quo as peaceful is bad. We argue that the AF's description of the status quo as peaceful is both rhetorical and a real world policy investment
Yeah.
in the institution.
What is
Like the reason I read, the reason we read multiple
This is important.
retrenchment
No,
arguments.
the status quo is retrenchment. What does the AF do to stop retrenchment?
Yeah, so the premise, like that's like the premise of the argument. The argument is that the AF invests in things that
It
makes
invests
its
in
reality.
what that stops retrenchment.
Well, the argument is like the status quo is not just like a calm, peaceful retrenchment. We generate
If
uniqueness
the status quo
through
is
our
not
off-case.
peaceful retrenchment, then what is your uniqueness for the impacts?
It's our off-case positions.
What does that mean?
All right, to be clear, we think that the hedge DA is a net benefit to an actualization of the Buddhism ultimately.
Oh, so now it's clear. Okay,
Well,
hedge
we also
bad is a
think
net
that-
benefit to Buddhism, and
We also-
not a dissad about the
But we do
status quo.
also think that it operates at the level of its independent dissent.
You
to
just said the status quo
at
is
the
not
level
peaceful.
of
You
the
said retrenchment is violent.
political investment in the idea of a peaceful status quo, and in the concrete investment in the institutions that you say are going away, which we think that Porter says are uniquely causing the instances of violence.
But let me just talk about this like chronic card, which is about China having a leg up on the U.S. because of its authoritarian government, etc. All that stuff is about using the United States' democratic potential to counter China. We've read like all of our retrenchment cards in the context of that.
Okay,
And we're going to make like arguments about that. If you think that's not true, then
We gotta move on.
That's
Let's
just-
talk about what the Buddhism critique is. What does it mean to be dispassionate about the 20C?
It
well,
means voting there.
But why? What does that mean in the context of Buddhist ethics?
Dispassionate just means like the app is bad, even if there's a little bit like a card here that you like.
If the app reduces suffering, is it good?
If the app is based on a delusion, vote no.
let me ask you,
What is the delusion?
what is
You
Why
can't
is
ask
suffering?
questions, that's not how cross-sex works. What is the delusion?
The
that you're
premise of your
describing?
question is suffering. Like, what about suffering is good?
What? Who said suffering was good? Let's go back to where we're going. What is the delusion that the app partakes in?
Well, this like binary between things being good or bad objectively is not how
Buddhists
violence
think that
operates.
actions can either have good karma or bad karma, so there is a
Yeah,
binary
but
between
good and
good
bad.
and
Hold on. Good and bad is not the good and bad is not the problem.
skillful and unskillful. like whatever we want to call it.
Delusion and violence are synonymous. Is the fundamental
Okay, what
premise.
about the app is delusional?
It's not evil. You said that there
What
is
about the
evil
app is
that
delusional?
exists. Well, the link arguments.
What about the app is
I
delusional?
mean, the link is dualism, if that's what you're asking.
We also think that you don't. We'll make antitrust laws about work law for us. Are you good?
840.
Did the one in C end up striking the Han card, or did you
No,
keep
they
it?
read the Han card, they skipped all the like trans econ stuff.
Got
I can also
Okay, 812.
How much left to go?
It's 6:55, I believe. I need to find where I, 6:53.
All right.
We're recording. These 2 seconds are crucial.
The order is the inequality advantage, DOJ credibility, vagueness, the PSC kind of plan, the K, the hedge case. Yeah, I did. Have people gone?
My internet's cutting out.
What were you sent it to?
Probably Michigan.
Lucky them.
We sent the one in C to our round 6 pairing and 7.
My signature move is setting up with our reviews getting for lunch. Okay. Do people have it now?
I would just go distracted.
We're all really rough right
High energy.
now. So that's amazing.
Okay, we're all good now.
Yes.
The first argument back with the decreases were unable to say because of economic independence was a scheme. This helping populist backlash and backed up with the institution because he worries that the French next time more frigid days which decreases independence and trade broadly that causes extinction. That's the one you see growth impact is under pop-up evidence. And the post zero evidence that says the growth decreases for its most recent studies and nationalism impact to withdraw from inequality causes diversion and nationalism causes worse perceived. The number of all judicial births and solution to do that's the sole evidence inequality erodes institutional quality causes elite capture, decrease investment in public goods, polarization, undermines social trust, attraction magnifies all actors, worsening causes militarism foreign policy that causes extinction and Schmidt evidence is a disaster alternative because they said that they reject all institutions that currently problem institutions necessarily means that people can distribute goods to do credibility advantage Marxist laws and station fields expected to make it pertaining more trophies and friends give power college Marxist laws and every other impact leaders are responsive to their citizens facilitate to form decisions innovation financial trust that's a crime evidence solves terrorism war with the rich states given to party causes and people for service are making progress against modern world libertarians who institutions party shows clear Russians virus on the money that people do coming as your sister chooses to do civilians and rich democracy strong institutions allow for long range building democracy the only priority for nearly every crisis war proven poverty terrorism culture and exact by authoritarian regime there's no weapon more powerful than America being envied limited and admired democracy is sustainable that's not at all toy in the world is unmistakably more democratic compared to 1972 we 67 considered all since the world talks to the certain positive circles to be more about we discuss the climate region to correct democracy all regions to Western Europe North America qualified as democratic controls 3/4 Latin America including all regions democracy represents at least 1/3 of all countries they're all the link to this turn is about all democratic decline not just the US or it's about the ability for institutions in the US to offer success which is distinct from the link to their turn is city points to decline which is not inevitable the 19 our original principles of origin continue to reach to the point where democracy the bigger total conclusion the world to Christian theories our tools not negative to just how close we're getting to that point until it happens democratic governments principles will stand for extinction apprehension because openings in Russia turn into a better authority in order causing nuclear war this will just 77 have been linked to 25 20 50 dependent and the armed concerns about the security growth environment distribution lines more performance about better and simply disaster routines promote rights and broadly government systems China Russia Russia global governance systems and about the system the original don't meet the system what describe Russia Chinese order rest of the 10 years common international national foundations that are getting enemy basically agricultural for the war president that is before the world war now the next group of CPTs to their evidence puts out that they're confounding variables that could explain peace but misuse correlation between prices and proxies and lack more democracy and sexual facts of economies because it differs investment in the country that's a code evidence to make this procedure for an exemption we need it we're also a person violation which is a set number of remedies and we're putting 30 seconds enforcement if a private business will send to the DOJ we also say remedies and plan limiting by the episodes every 20 organizations with purchase conducting single entity except professional violations moves to the world reason for 6 minutes scope of interest increases prohibitions as HLR 20 the court for the massive embarrassment successful screening different corporations with maybe others with interest on the court so that the using role of activity defendants in the proliferation will have no chance to justify their actions precision their evidence is not defining a word resolution there's no basis for it no because it's infinitely aggressive causes bad things because people have to put those things in their plain text or proofs of interpretation aggressive this impossible with the offense against the if you have to specify things like the prohibitions and the remedies in the plain text journal fit also solves the implementation question because the plain is not the text of the bill reasonability non-resolution theory is bad and causes substance credit with PSC kind of plain is solved due to credibility failure law default through enforcing powers it takes legitimacy undermines their capability that's undermines capability does not support equality class action lawsuits are key to encouraging works with false providing competition for wages listen to a corporation office people won't know that they've signed no code which means they can't solve that's the Landy evidence PSC does not allow people current people stuck in jobs and access new ones does not solve wage precedent it establishes a program that doesn't exist without describing what the program is it means we do get to the action to it this kind of is because they only highlight somebody who advocates for it that explains what the hell PSC means definitely links to that because integrated access both growth and democracy with solves the principle means it links all their offense employers looking at the counter plan sign on 19 trust and because business models they will dominate for proposals to take the level of test with the leads right and fact employers between the strong incentive push workers at the protection interest creates significant also doing such whole things under interest liabilities and companies about how you get employees incentives misclassify if anything it's education which people can leverage for education okay permutation do both it's also true because it shows a link to the term conditionalized of under excuse me choose strategy causes shock of one and see the price which is not exceeded with inconsistent unique rules and just consider statistics purposes positionality solve the case at least on your private circle logic control consider this not social for requiring the of the point and not must have been unique which are solved to keep clash advocacy for it is extinction ways it's the only universal impact of this the only logic logic say there's only risk by community positive experience are possible none of their offenses go here without consciousness dealing with everybody which always have years ago killing everyone for advocacy circle logic that's like above the worst form of structural violence and it just mass violence against minorities domestic militarism they're painful disproportionately harmful to the population without water food or medicine and the comparison is inherently utilitarian Buddhism, and util are compatible with Tom, which is next to the particular, and the humorous dependence on the time of personal goodness of actions about an equal subject of the music of good people whose action is suffering is close to utilitarianism, utilitarianism is cosmos with action. There's my wrong based on the consequences, Buddhism, there's an end of ill being, it's also consequential of death, as heals with evil, how to suffer with death. It's a direct field of his ontology, shows us the field of spirit, and society, independently of calculation of our worst socialized, such an evil is not consciously experience in order to be evil, that is, reason what it changes the structure of anything, and then increase the possible maintaining person is evil, much of their life cannot be warranted in succession of ultimate this is five for the subject, more the current subject, you know, maybe it is Buddhist or remote possible to debate the alternative, let debaters lead to a structure which kills clash, created debate center sentiments of logic is not ego, delusions, key to engagement, research, and risk mitigation, that's Roski, exegesis, marketing, marketing, department, experts, the risk mitigation, the probable causes are the problems of lack of force, really positive issues, executive product, to be with the people is a lack of challenge setting, exercise, risk, following presentation, requires engagement, and research, permutation, both of the alternatives, solving success, going solves the permutation, do the affirmative part, and alternative, these for retrenchment, solve the head, show no ego, delusion, crabtree, love of Buddhist, cycle about to protect the person, the rest of not fit, Buddhist, the Buddhist space, and kind of producing your mind, and psychotic, Buddhist, to offer rights, and how the houses, they bring this beyond often the same program, so spiritual recall, suffering is not created because everybody sees images, external, personal cravings, the plane is equally powerful, social, ritual, love do really recall, something there's more suffering than thought, craving, the societal, cause of suffering, the sense of the teaching, when there's much more than people, not the physical, mental, sometimes it's suffering by changing, the thing outside of self history, a teaching ignores the implementation of the personal inside, they see the cause line towards other causes, alternative feels like cannot agree to marks, means the cases that decide, the institution itself also impact turns it, gonna go to the head's turn, right? Yeah. Sure. The hedge turn one is look at the implemented democracy in Germany, the active ability model soft power national, which is completely distinct. We also not run a hedge impact investment in liberal order. It's not the same thing as promoting in Germany. Our evidence is about the ability to enforce laws properly. That's different because often the evidence is about military hard power, troop deployment, etc. They have no uniqueness question that those things will decline now. If they do decline now, the status quo is retrenchment, then rhetorical investment has nothing to prevent it because they need to read that card because what we say in debates is not the lower American prophecy solves every thought, right? They seem to say American prophecy finding strategic bankruptcy, the Americans put into military prophecy barrel, and Europeans into Middle East prostitutes on the zone, the Harvard back when floating, and a nuclear proliferation contact terrorism, centrality, military phenomena, and the allies because it preserves substantial overcrowding the global norms, cultural reality, takes us to assured by the primacy, resilience, and credibility, building bridges. It's where Mars is building natural coast of the unaddressable levels of great power, high security, and European decision point of view to rogue hours, China testing global norms, such as non-aggression and navigation. China could have built historic proportions of more committed environment earthquakes, could nuclear arsenal, runways, nuclear special state process, crisis, almost 6 point. Those are operation commitments, use forces, technological capability, really fast, abilities, need to protect American aircraft challenges, multiple performance, CCP, array of threats, the litany of doom, clouds, floating clouds, CG5 transition, work back the easy world politics, and to give it 16 cases with the rise of power challenges, hold run and carbon patterns, clear department card, as a question for words, beautiful learning for this on the end of a whole words with a career, a full submission to a generation, has one of our prosperous, lenses, push to make a new government and rollers, and a feature launch the possibilities into us in that place around the world, as a piece of learning before interested words, have this fit spirits in the words, to have to come back to 500 the economy has much of humans, something become 20 times as fun, of course, as radically high has been explained by geopolitics, society, sociology, costs of Soviet Union, open and thrones, democracy, wars, and peacekeeping, given the conflict with the overwhelming news military languages, had to working the American letter on the wars are thankful. Can you find me? I just see the word. Both sides misconduct can 24 as like when the power one is declining, Russian judge of power to power, rising power nations work against declining hegemonic business more food, more faster power to dominate, rising climate changes, sufficiently new normal ways that hegemonic order, people attention to force and have to use function over human history teaches us. As parents like people for the transition was like even current democracy, use preventive wars most attractive to living things as declining hegemonic wars better option. There's no global institutions in fact because our nature says us can't do those things alone, nothing. Declining journey means that we can do those things better because we don't access but also do any terminal impacts anything. I just see the whole chronic 20 US rates and only some to power there's really spread more studies found across the ways to say more strong most already is premature views since one of the next 9 countries combining most views as always take 20 cities with the super layers replace the heavily in technology and personal weapons like this and 30 pennies massively loaded with the defense control society the first steps building multi technologies use specifically how to use green strategy pessimists are incorrect including also vegetable trying to use with the
just analytically pursue them.
Pursuit of hegemony is inevitable. The pursuit of hegemony is inevitable because leaders will launch out and will declare with the transition wars from the off of the Carter and above proves that best slaves for impact groups. Since you develop and simplify the church, and detract from the test findings reaching out to the results of the rest of the lives of the church, in fact, studies to the university to these consequences of the analysis source of common culture forces in the 60 theories of churches practices. Key forward put troops in the fact that studies are the expectations to define that to challenge alliances of nuclear as for selection factors against common language and religious homeland accessible for church is even because defending is spread with the overturning. These findings are this by the way that someone to say any later approaches security testing continuing to reference financial logic exposed relevant as physical analysis conclude that security guarantees reduced for the first stage of guarantees less than the transfer mature technology multiple independently studies feel that security license make decisions as for countries only speaking about the language protection research of the treatment landscape language and first capacities and preferred videos is key to respond to the most comprehensive analysis finding the same method. Let me send a mark.
Okay. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just like pull up the card I wanted to refer to. Okay. Good?
Yeah.
Okay, so this colleges evidence that you read on the democracy turn says the democratic project for global governance is at risk, and then it says Russia and China would rest global governance on big power spheres of influence, and both would assume hegemonic status in the respective regions. Why doesn't this prove the interrelatedness between assumption and challenging of democratic norms, and disprove the no link argument on the
Sure.
dissent?
So the arguments you're reading on the dissent are about, like I said, military capabilities, hard power, true projections. What this card is
So
saying.
you think hedge has nothing to do with soft power at all?
I don't think that the evidence you're reading has anything to do with soft power. The distinction that this card makes is literally says it goes to the democratic project because it says that global governance would be rested on the idea of big power spheres of influence, and it says that it assumes,
Okay,
I guess,
global governance rests on them having
yeah,
power.
it's consistent with
So
our
let me
arguments
ask you, what do you
about
think hedge
institutions.
is? What do you think hedge, like,
I've already explained many times in this debate the distinction between the ability to like shape international institutions around certain norms
okay,
versus
that's
the
like
hard power,
basically our link
troop
argument.
deployments,
Okay,
and
whatever.
weapon capabilities. You have not read a card that says that the ability for Russia and China to influence institutions and undermine DOJ enforcement of domestic antitrust law decreases like our BMD deployments internationally.
Okay,
There's a
let's talk, did you, first of all, you read the transition back to wars card, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this evidence says the dramatic decline in warfare after 91 is better explained by geopolitics and sociology.
Yeah.
What? Oh, I totally forgot what question I said because you said something. But yeah, sure, whatever, say whatever you're gonna say. I don't know.
Oh, I mean, this is just an answer to that generic FedWeiss warrant that's just like, oh, look, the US cut defense spending in the 90s and then nothing happened, but obviously like the Soviet Union collapsed. So
Okay, so what is hedge's explanation for like global interventions?
and just explain, I mean, geopolitical interests, presumably.
So
But like interventions into like Libya, for example.
Yeah, I mean, to stop them from getting a nuke.
So those are good.
no, we don't think interventions are good. We think if you would unique
To stop them
argument
from
about
getting a
intervention,
nuke. I mean,
our evidence
That's
says
the
that
part for-
hegemony decreases interventions because then we can avoid fights that are relevant. Our evidence says that there's a likely
okay,
higher
but
risk
I'm
of
saying,
decline.
okay, so let's talk about the rational calculation that goes down in the United States Senate, okay? Big scary brown country has a nuke. Let's intervene there, okay?
You asked me what the justification for the US intervention is.
Yeah, I know, and the justification is this country has a nuke, okay? Right?
Well,
That's what
I
you
mean,
So they didn't have one, but they were going. Like that was
Oh,
the
they
idea.
didn't have one, Iraq too, but whatever.
Our
But-
evidence says that in times of decline, interventions increase and restraint decreases, which means that any argument you make about the US being irrational is an apt argument that proves a transition.
So, okay, let's talk about that. Why is irrationality, why should we invest in a system where you said the US is irrational?
If
It does
moving away
irrational
from the
things.
system causes net more violence, then I think that it's probably good to avoid that.
It is good to invest in irrationalism.
Look, we agree.
That makes
US
no
hegemony-
sense at all.
Hegemony, not perfect. Russia,
Not
China
perfect, I
hegemony,
agree.
Russian and Chinese hegemony.
Okay,
much,
so
much
you're going
worse.
for,
That's the
you're
argument.
going for Chinese worse, okay.
Yes.
The alternatives are worse, and retrenchment increases the negative effects of that irrationality. So who cares if rationality is there if it's repressed and can't hurt anybody?
Okay, sure, start.
Theory, I just heard condo
Utopia alts.
and utopia else. Okay. Can you clean up stuff? I can't clean up stuff.
stopping it. 2:30.
Sounds really since Cook. Let me grab some water.
I'll wait for him to get back to you. But it's set. Does everyone have it?
I don't know, could be an illusion.
All right, what is going to be cases in orders of inequality credibility?
You're getting the hedge cross.
Well, yeah, so just as a warning, there's going to be like cross-apps from like most of the first two cards of hedge, like everywhere kind of. So
Love that.
yeah, I'll try to be clear like what I'm talking about. Cases inequality credibility.
Give me 1 second to hold the doc.
That's great. The 2AC is conceding fundamental ontological framings about the world. Only running through the alt-radical interdependence can achieve enlightenment. The topic is fundamentally a question of political and economic models. Kay is arguing we have to take this further to evaluate different ways of understanding the world in general. The only way to solve existential crisis requires an internal spiritual transformation of care and embracing interdependence over atomized dualist individualism. First is that mind world dualism is a prerequisite for war, genocide, WMD use, and mass extinction. If you consider yourself from others, you can justify violence, but if you view survival as interconnected, violence becomes impossible. That's Lloyd. That's sufficient to prove a root cause claim because they've conceded that dualism is a necessary precondition for every one of these instances of violence that are cited both in the 1AC and on the K. We don't need to win that, like, this is the only possible thing that can cause that can be explaining these instances of violence. We don't need to win. There aren't other things that interact with violence in the status quo because we are winning the conceded ontological claim that violence is impossible in a world without the dualist ontology. Singularity is inevitable. Abstract is perpetual suffering. The alt-solvent, Hughes 19. Theoretical will radically challenge the human kind of Buddhists will have disadvantages adapting their post-human future human beings to live all into gods and super beings, 1,000-year lives in the future, but some utopia efforts are building a Buddhist engagement with humanity, has Buddhist teaching, collaborate with neuroscience and neurotechnology will increase the relevance of Buddhist psychology, responsible to the solution to history, those that cause suffering, and structural dukkha. The app makes their own impacts inevitable. That's a reason to vote nay, even if we solve nothing. Suffering and evil are not just due to external forces, but rather the true roots of evil, delusion, greed, and anger, which are all inherent in the 1AC. Those all are ontological poisons. I'll extend Bhikkhu here. That means that those come before the level of even weighing the case. They don't get to even get to the point of their impacts if we win that there's some delusive element in their argumentative chain, like of how they even get to those impacts. They're not winning that things are good or bad, but we're winning that they're delusional in the way that they formulate where those things can be good or bad in the first place. There's going to be more on framework in the 1R, but that means that all of our K claims logically come before every case claim, even if they win framework. There's no logical explanation of what it means to weigh the case and evaluate things from a util perspective in a world where they're just not winning, that like their calculations of like of body counts are valid and based on a non-delusional starting point. There is ethics. Util ideal is a flawed way. Actually, sorry, that'll be in the 1R. Yeah, I'll skip down to the alt. Faced with the fruits of evil, the alternative is to put down the entire 1AC. Shedding attachment to dualist solution allows us to embrace interdependence and achieve enlightenment. Maintaining attachment to sovereign authority ensures structural dukkha that makes every act impact inevitable. Pure Wall 19. All existence is imperfect. This contrasts the positivist view, the modern Western political philosophy. Positive view is a secular and rational view of the world that says that all things in the world can be observed factually without resorting to explanations of first or ultimate causes like God or nature. Positivism says that the sovereign government is the source of all political authority without having to refer to any natural law. Use of politics can be a function of power without considering any higher philosophy and morality. Nazi Germany is an example of the constant positive way of thinking. Political philosophy that ignores the natural law would only harm individuals who are literally identified with self-contained entity. We impose a static self on the otherwise dynamic and fluid world and create suffering. The separation between self and all that is not self creates resistance, disharmony, dukkha. Politics would be a moral undertaking. Western philosophies construe politics as morally neutral based on utilitarian considerations to flourish to live in accordance with Dharma. Neglecting or violating karma leads to suffering. Buddhist political philosophy would explain the evolution of the world through karma. Modern Western political science also analyzes the causes of phenomena, but these causes are analyzed individually in isolation from other possible causes. Buddhist theory explains how societies change over time and alleviates the distress through morally skillful means rather than gathering to their greed, hatred, and delusion. We're losing our stability as civilization in the world seething with greed, hatred, and delusion. Buddhist political philosophy is just one way of thinking differently about international affairs. We flourish when we awaken to our basic capacity, embrace and live in accordance with things that they truly are. The alt means saying move to the affirmative. They're saying yes to the wrong question. Move on 1228. A monk asked Joshua, Chinese Zen master, has a dog a Buddha nature or not? Joshua answered, move. Enlightenment always comes after the road of thinking is blocked. What is the barrier? This one word move is hit. If you want to pass this barrier, you must work through when your body can already pour your skin through. So this question, what is move? Do not believe it's a common negative. Put your whole energy into this move and do not allow any discontinuation. When you enter this move, there's no discontinuation. Your routine will be as a candle burning and illuminating the whole universe. As a dog of Buddha nature, this is the most serious question of all. If you say yes or no, you lose your own Buddha nature. But K turns all of K's. First, it turns inequality. Dualist delusions of the 1AC make true equality impossible. The app envisions inequality as arising out of these two sort of fundamentally separate groups that are implied and central to everything in the 1AC. There's this sort of masses that are the ones who have all the nationalist sentiment, the ones that are like not being productive enough, the ones that are being shuffled back and forth through companies to try to drive up productivity and save the democratic global order in the world of the app. Then there's this implied like group that includes them that like is pure of any culpability in nationalism, that only does nationalism to try to appease the masses, that needs to be logically in control and governing everything democratically, but that also is somehow always perfectly responsive to and good to the democratic masses. That's a bad and delusive way of envisioning the world. And given the inevitability of change and instability, that means a permanent equality between those artificially separated groups is never possible. So the only possible outcome of the app is serial policy failure and the infinite replication of impact through structural dukkha. Only an ontology of radical interdependence that gets rid of that artificial divide can overcome the dualist divisions of the status quo. Second is nationalism. I'll cross-apply from both Porter and Biden. They talk about how nationalism or nationalism isn't just like some like inherent thing that the masses always believe. It arises, as explicitly stated in the cards and as conceded, from specific problems with the status quo that people have. Those are things that we can't just ignore, that we can't just make go away by shuffling people between McDonald's franchises faster. The only way to resolve that is to resolve the fundamental root cause harms of the status quo, which only the K does. They're just heads. The conceded thesis of Porter is a clear delusion like about the app's racist assumptions about the other, which was also really clear in cross-sex. That turns advantage too. The status quo is violent. The app never claims they can get better than the status quo. They just claim that the status quo is sustainable, that we can like maintain the status quo democratic peace. They ignore that the U.S. is violent in the status quo. The U.S. ensures extinction in the status quo through violent intervention globally. That they're going to have some sustainability stuff in the 1AR, but independently, their sustainability arguments never address the inherent violence of status quo domination. The U.S. has to make extinction level through violent intervention. Next on the links, the affirmative participates in the three roots of evil: greed, delusion, and anger. If we went link to any of these, apps incompatible with the alternative and independently fails to solve versus delusion. The app's use of legal reforms is fundamentally delusional. Trespassing always has empirically failed to structurally change the nature of American corporate power and governance. Look at the first cross-check when they conceded that, sure, maybe this was all like one specific kind of agreements between franchisees and franchisors. They just flat out admitted they don't solve things like non-compete agreements. So like worst case solvency for the app, every McDonald's franchisee is just going to like make an agreement with their employees saying you're not allowed to go work somewhere else. Literally zero solvency vote neg on presumption. I'll skip the Jensen card, but the antijustice failed for 10 cycles. How can it be enlightened? Move on 1228. The Buddha who lived before recorded history sat in meditation for 10 cycles of existence and could not realize the highest truth. Since Buddha was meditating, why did he not people Buddha? He was not a Buddha. Second is greed. The app engaged in the greedy accumulation of corporate and Harvard authority, ignoring the basic logical contradiction that creates. That turns case and ensures the app can only result in the further diminishing commodification a commodification of working people, of everyone in the status quo. The absolute logic about growth is circular. The one I see claims that slow growth causes inequality, inequality causes slow growth. The only possibility they can imagine is infinite fast growth with no endpoint. That turns case and results in inevitable ecocide extinction, Jensen 4. Corporation is a creature of law. When a government charges corporation is setting in motion a pressure system of individuals acting like one world being created solely to mass wealth constitutional issue dissatisfaction, economic manifestation of hungry ghosts who roam the earth, always eating their sacred clear cutters and deforestation, and testifying to find forests to cut. At the same time, last few years have broken all records in the amount of forest cut down, carted down. I'll skip anger. We only need the first two. Any presence of any root of evil is sufficient to justify putting down the entire one I see in a world where they really haven't contested Bhikkhu.
Did you read Lloyd?
What?
Lloyd card?
No. Next on the perms. The 1AC participates in the three roots of evil. Any limp means and all the perms are non-starters. Any dilution in the 1AC conceded means you put down the entire thing. And no perm framework means you should rethink how you value competition and debate. That'll be the 1 and R. Foxy, the perm is an ego soul clinging to the app while anything without understanding. But an app is sure is wandering as a fox, making a delusion without the liberation of enlightenment. Move on 1228. Zwigan is called out to himself every day, master. Then he answered himself, yes, sir. Zwigan is playing a puppet show. If anyone thinks that any of his master is mistaken, yet he imitates Zwigan, who will make himself fox-like. Ego soul is the seed of birth and death, and most people call it a true man. I'll move to case. The K interacts with and turns basically every argument that they've extended. First, on inequality, they say slow growth, that growth is good. One, no. Our evidence indicates that they have no way out of this infinite cycle of fast growth. I'll classify Jensen, the only outcome is inevitable ecocide and extinction, and also not winning that good growth makes things better, and we're winning the status quo that they preserve is violent. Also, our interdependence resolve things better. They say nationalism, we have a better internal link to nationalism on Porter and the other flow, which turns this entire flow. On credibility, they say that the status quo is sustainable and good. At the top of the line, a lot of the hedge debate is going to matter here. You can classify Bidart and Porter. That proves they're wrong about the status quo and to describe populism better. They can never get better than a status quo that they conceded is unacceptably violent, so no reason to go back.
Okay, are you good? The delusion argument, how do we know when something is wrong or delusional?
We think that that's what the debate is about. We don't think that we should say like, oh, we said it's delusional, vote neg. We think we're going to have a debate over whether certain assumptions in the 1AC are or are not delusional.
Sure.
If we win that the 1AC is based on delusional assumptions, the judge should vote neg.
So in order for you to prove something is delusional, how do we know with certainty when something is or is not wrong? That's my question. What's the threshold where you're like, okay, once it's like 50% certainty, it's delusional, once it's not?
All right, we think there's no such thing as certainty. We think that as in any debate, we're having a debate over a contested question. It's not going to be like a scientific thing where like we plug the app into a calculator.
If there's any risk that any part of the 1AC is delusional, it should be rejected in its entirety. My question is, how do we know we've reached that conclusion?
We think that the judge at the end of the debate is just going to have to evaluate, do I or do I not think that the app is right or the neg is right about X, Y, Z?
And that just happens on what, the case debating?
Well, that's the goal of the judge.
Because I'm confused because it seems like the critique and the idea that what the app is describing is delusional requires you disproving the 1AC in our.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, we think that we are disproving the 1AC. We think the judges are going to agree with us. The app is just wrong about certain things and therefore it's delusional. That's what we think is.
But you have not
So if the 1AC is right about its scenario.
So if you're going to go for our cars are right, our authors are right, we've made a broader ethical indictment about why ethics are prior to those claims, and also about why your scientific valuation cannot achieve true wisdom.
Yeah, like
Our argument is that enlightenment can only be achieved through interrogating and connecting it through.
like trivial, yeah. Like if you guys just like win every argument.
Argument about interrelation / doing people as separate groups. To what degree are people interrelated? Because the 1AC seems to assume some sort of relationship between employers and their workers and wages and the way that people have to produce things or other people to buy things. So I'm confused.
Our link is to the way that you've divided the world in between, well, in that very concrete example, and like you explained in cross-sex, this group of people that are sort of able to engage with agency, right? Like employers, franchisees, franchisors, etc. And then this group of like objectified workers that you're just like shuttling between McDonald's franchises to try to see.
The argument is you don't break the binary. Like right now it's consumer focused, but the app isn't an everyone focused, it's a worker focused, which presumes the fundamental argument we're making about not breaking from these dualisms and binaries.
So it's not that those things are wrong, right? You don't disagree that there's a relationship.
See, this is the sort of narrow focus which prevents you from actualizing broader interconnectedness.
I'm genuinely
The idea that,
clarification.
hey, the app
because
is
you
a
are
good
not
thing on a
explaining.
small level is not going to win you though.
Sure. argument about the Porter stuff and Porter being delusional, we read studies disproving sustainability argument. You have not indicted them. What's your conclusion that proves to you that Porter?
You've read studies that claim that like the U.S. violence system can continue to exist for a really long time. We're gonna have that debate in the 1NR, but my argument in the 2NC was that like even if you all are right that like this violent U.S. system can just keep going forever, it's still bad, it's still violent, we should still reject it.
No problem. Good. Okay, we're good. The order's a little complicated. The cards are set though. Can I see this too? Oh, sorry. It's gonna be the counter plan, condos there. Then the hedge DA. And sorry in advance, the hedge DA is, there's no mind violence. Random. But I'll be answering arguments.
Can you redo that whole thing? Sorry.
Okay, counter plan, condos there. Hedge, I recommend strongly flowing straight down.
Okay, I mean, don't know what other way, but yeah.
Then the critique, I'm gonna do the ontology stuff at the top on the critique. Then I'm gonna do the framework stuff. Then I'm gonna do the ethics util stuff.
Awesome. Okay, so counterplan, hedge DA, K.
Yeah.
Sure.
Everyone good?
Yeah.
Okay. Not going for a person test competition, didn't ask for a dispo, no offense, logic, the burden of the negatives to disprove the F, however possible to retain the offense, to generate negative flex, so the F speaks first and last, so you ask, give us leeway, excuse it, and we'll reject everything that the team hegemony, they have dropped, but this quote is retrenched with the thesis of their democracy, cards for control, that is peaceful now, no link argument is incoherent, the cross-section to a secret that the frames for this should be used in spill over the unsustainable pieces of evidence. One, ontology frames how you evaluate this debate, because it means it absent any analysis about how any of their evidence can explain karmic cycles, means that you should treat it through this system, so you should place heavier emphasis on our historical examples as present in order and minority examples, which means that interventions, etc., in Libya, as well as other conflicts which never escalated, have to come by pursuit inevitable. One, delusion creates inevitable pursuit. Two, delusion creates inevitable pursuit because we should not engage and invest in a system of the United States. They have conceded that they reinvest in that overarching system despite their overarching building argument. Second, they have no evidence, they do not get to read some in the 1AR. We read 3 cards about retention peaceful now. There's fuller evidence that the U.S. won't latch on. They've conceded that they have to invest in that, and it's framed by all of our ontology arguments. Ontology, 2 frames. 1, Emory has no explanatory power over how suffering happens. This was cross-6. This means you're certain that attachment drives suffering and dukkha, and that the F is the only possible way to relate to the world. Cards about the other cards that are somewhat responsive or say Buddhism are not responsive to the overall ideas of good and bad, because they have no defense for. Even if they can explain certain actors, they cannot grapple with broader incentives for conflict or karmic cycles. This is a limited contestation of ontology, which will loosen the debate. To contextualize this, it's essentially against Afro-pessimism. You cannot vote for a team that says psycho wrong, but this completely concedes reformism never works. They have only answered a component of the argument, but they concede that that their structure of suffering is analyzed to this. They can win arguments about util, etc., all those things, but they consider the working nature of how ontology structures the things, which you can only navigate for the alternative. Now, even if we do not win that overworking frame, we can still access the offense as it generates because they've dropped, and it's good to choose an ontology. The big evidence says that even if Emory is correct about their later set in the back scenarios, we will not be able to access the institutional efforts of power soon enough to resolve them. The only relevant question is relation to the world and ethics. Endless debating presumes fiat trades up with super interrogations of enlightenment, but our interpret would solve their offense, which will be unfair. Every hash takes place in the conversation all the way, and the wars held on the list continuously have seen about the military industrial complex, hard raw, this is the world of war, entire fundamental official for war, something, sometimes you from both first to village conflict, the beliefs, like from this war, something, as well as good, evil, must focus, must be on fighting it, that evidence is marked and fighting it, utopian, fiat, contra, justifies utopian, the ultimate about growing dispassionate with the affirmative, which is a rejection of its pedagogical institution, which means it's not fiat ethics, 2 frames for the util ethics to be, oh, sorry, I said I was going to be affirmative first. Our interpretation is that the negative test asks consequences or ontological assumptions. 1, ontological prior getting in the right relation to things is the only way to figure out what we should do. The question of what we should do imports presuppositions about ontological subjectivity. Those presuppositions are wrong. Our diagnosis and prophecy prescriptions will also be wrong, so they cannot perm away the links. It also means they cannot access the case until they defended their ontology nirvana. Decide the fiat it causes serial policy failure, starting from conceptions and justifying them. Post facto causes serial policy failure, only starting from justifications for ethics and then arriving at conclusions. True pragmatic ways to and with the rule post facto justification always uses whatever ethics convenient to suit its needs. order to promulgate its objectives. This is a delusion which causes the war on terror, etc., the fear of rocket weapons and mass destruction. This turns the endpoint of their education. Remember, cross 6, Henry thinks there's no problem in saying that these brown countries have nukes and we should invade them. This is the exact reason that 08 caused such problems. No problems if you do not learn from history that is pure delusion. Our division solves their offense. One, fairness is an attachment because you were fairness is an attachment. Fairness is an attachment because you were trapped within the monopoly of the game. That you're trapped within. Also, clash will be a clash in education. Standards are not the true form of education. Enlightenment, as the endpoint of that, this is mostly explained in the 2 and C. But the neg has a myopic focus on how we gain any value from that. The alternative is the only way to actualize that, which was explained in the 2 and C. You tell the consequences stop. The neg has a myopic focus on good and evil, death and pain. Oh, I think I didn't answer their death is ultimate evil card. Oh no, I'll answer that on Utah. What was the card I didn't answer? Oh, no, I'm gonna do all that here. Okay, Utah. Neg has a myopic focus on good and evil, death and pain are better explained through Dukkha, which is the premise of their Patterson evidence about it being the most evil, because that's not, evil is not, you should treat delusion and ignorance as synonymous with violence. The way that violence occurs is not through things being bad in the abstract and positioning themselves against that. That is the logic of interventions. Rather, delusion and ignorance is what causes us to enable violence on other things. The 2 and C separation between good and evil is the justification for interventions that takes out any risk of appropriation because consequential utilitarian aggregation causes the same thought problems. The Han evidence just says that things are bad, but I'll read more evidence. But the warrants in this piece of evidence says that whether behavior is good depends on beneficial for the greatest number, and about the locus point of who's evaluating it. They've conceded that everyone is interconnected, which means that this mode of aggregation fails, and UTIL cannot account for actors which are external to the scope, which is the premise of our argument about how intervention happens. Consequential of Virgos and goals for shock at 21 and attended masters equal to the habituation to here, having a without training way of the topic connection covered by craving, which when training attention can be wants a sense of interdependent relations, ethics, and the goals, practice, and cultivating attention mastery without ethics, right, and judgments to be useful of compassion, not permissible to graphic consequential to harm to practice the carbon causes and suffering the causal with its virtuosity about in terms of others speaking about causal and not simply referring to the bad things and doing it the purpose of deliberation. It's developing and value systems that they're enabled personally and usually about it's not better access to the scope of justifications. The Vienna debate stuff about existential risk, not ego delusion. It does not disprove the link. It's not about extinction focus, but rather delusion link, the delusion internal link basis of arguments. But if they make it an extinction argument, Buddhism solves environmental degradation and Buddhism better accesses the conception of future generations. All nine and 18 we are interdependent. Nothing exists an interdependent separate entity, and the present and future generation not provided voices to the extent that people today want to invent a second future generation. That's a new generation technology interdependence with each provides energy instead of way to cost the environment. We are controllable cost reverse or else to take the relative reaction crisis driven by left word is a lack of concern. I'll mark that as a concern. They read a card which they're going to try to apply ontology in the 1AR. This piece of evidence just says that my suffering is not caused as a result of attachment, but that is the premise of the idea that they are an individual subject, which is our overarching frame. And this piece of evidence does not answer all of our pure wall evidence and the Loy evidence, which are about good and evil and morals and what that causes.
Okay. We had question mark 0. I know you were the last person. Yeah, I know we had 840 going into 2AC prep. Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
You have
We'll start.
Wait, what's going on?
we can figure it out.
They just
Oh, yeah.
We had 3:30 hit.
Before I say
More shit inside. Should be saved the drug box.
yeah, no, for sure.
Like explanation in between.
I'm gonna type these up. Make sure
I said all twice. So this time.
we'll do some like
Yeah, people in turns can mix in the same place. This is Yeah, no, I would put links towards and links in the same place.
I'll go over this.
Yeah.
Wait, did this?
Yes, I saw you. Or soccer.
Here, I'll see. Look, you know what that's here. We're at 335. One card, it's in deck. Everyone good for an order. So where is our stuff? Yeah. The order is going to be an inequality advantage, the DOJ advantage, the hedge DA, maybe the hedge net benefit, I don't know, and then the K.
You good? Oh, hold on. I forgot to open the card.
Oh, wait, sorry, I did not get that order. It's case.
Inequality advantage, DOJ advantage, this at K.
Oh, there we go.
I'm not ready. My computer's dying.
You can just,
No,
Are they in second? Do we need tech time?
Not the tech time in person debate.
It's like kind of right.
No, it's the ear chomp. Let's just go.
Okay, it's a card that says no singularity, so.
Okay, I have maps.
Okay. The most.
Yeah, I don't know.
we're just adding timers. We just keep adding things.
Listen, I'm not gonna say no, you're like, it's a for us. I mean, they will say no.
I'm ready.
Oh my god.
I'm sorry. I had it.
No, we need tech time.
Nope.
I'm
denied.
Inequality advantage, the drop to external impacts. One is nationalism and causes lash out to distract the domestic permissibility, overcomes the barriers to escalation that sold their evidence to relative decline to its institutions. Inequality wrecks their legitimacy, causes silly capture polarization, nukes social trust, and magnifies all existential risks, turns all their offense because institutional legitimacy can cap all the sorts of things that they say. Then individualization and atomization make it inevitable. Third is growth, economic decline causes war instability, increases domestic tensions, which causes diversion, economic conflict, and embolden military foreign policy. Most recent studies go aft when a 2NC1 is no way out of the cycle of fast growth. That's obviously not true. If we solve inequality, then we can sustain levels of growth that keep it such that inequality does not reinverse itself. We've never made the argument that growth turns inequality, only the other way, and we solve it. The interdependence cannot solve the app because the ethics are applied to the decision-making frame of the app. You can only decide whether the app is good or bad based on those ethics, but you can apply those ethics to military and government affairs, which means that only voting app solves the alternative solving nationalism is not true for the same reasons. DOJ advantage, they extend hedge, which is responsive to some of the democracy stuff, but not to the war scenario. It solves a broad conflict escalation because democratic institutions are less likely to go to war. DPT is true, and there's statistical correlation between the two. The status quo, unacceptable, argues on the HDA, which I'll do now. Only unipolarity has sustained a peaceful world by deterring Russia, China, North Korea, the Middle East from nuclear war, proliferation, terrorism. That's reigns in World War III. Is inevitable. All destroys foreign policy and trade because it abandons support for U.S. engagement, which is exponentially worse because the U.S. goes down fighting with zero checks on interventions and force re-entry transition society to total war and militarization. Hedge is sustainable. This proves the analysis of the Porter card.
But we have 3.
That's normal.
Yes. Wait, just to be clear, y'all didn't like read policy.
Yeah, it's fine.
I'm chatting.
What?
Just to be clear, like no policy, right? Like the card.
No, I did not read the singular.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure.
So under their framework, the belief that outweighs their technical.
Hell yeah. That literally sounds like, yeah.
Steps a minute.
Steps a minute, something I can, yeah.
I know.
Oh. Pernell McPhee is one, there's a white quarterback named Pernell McPhee, and I'm like, oh my god, you're from a time machine.
Everyone ready for an order? Yes. All right, it's gonna be K with like case cross application than the HDF. So it's KH.
This okay?
Sorry.
Okay.
All right, is anyone not ready? Both have to put down the entire 1AC and refuse to endorse a project rooted in delusion that aims to maintain a structurally violent status quo. Delusion and ethics come before any impact of the plan. We're winning that delusion interrupts the causal chain of arguments that they use to justify their impacts, so they have no offense. 1 AR flat drops singularity. That can outweigh extinction in a world where we're winning offense at the level of the causal chain of arguments that they use to justify having their impact in the first place. Conceded truth of singularity ensures infinite suffering from any ontological delusion. That means that the link alone outweighs all of case and must be resolved before you even consider any 1AC impacts. The 1AC also just extended like one thing on ontology and flat dropped the nirvana DA. That means no perm. Ontology is logically prior because before the impacts the app is way, and there's no way to evaluate the app's consequences for their starting points are delusional. K impacts turn and outweigh the app. Dualist delusion is a conceded necessary prerequisite for war, genocide, double-ended use, ecocide, and extinction that flips the direction of util. But util is never a moral or logical framework to evaluate the round. The thesis of ontological poison is that any conclusions that arise from a delusional starting point are also delusional, and that includes the app impacts that they're trying to evaluate in this utilitarian frame. Their model debate just devolves into the greedy accumulation of a higher and higher body count, trying to just make stuff up and to justify like the maintenance of a violent and unethical status quo, which they've conceded. That's terminally incompatible with the K, so no perm, and it proves that our ethical framework is better. The K links alone are sufficient to turn the entire case. I'm going to go through every one of the 1AC impacts and demonstrate how the K links alone are sufficient. First, the first impact that they extend is nationalism, but they've flat conceded that Porter and Biner give a better explanation for how that nationalism arises. It arises from real problems in the status quo that are rooted in the dualist ontology and a dualist conception and organization of a world, which are things that the app just flat out doesn't solve. That independently means no solvency for that war impact. Radical interdependence is a try or die ethical starting point to resolve that. Second, they say institutions lead to elite capture, but they drop the analysis I did at the top on our inequality link. But the app's description of the causes of inequality and the nature of society is fundamentally delusional and ensures zero risk of solvency. They've divided the world into these like massive, like nationalist, populist masses that are like blamed for every instance of violence and nationalism, and this like and these elites that are capturing institutions that they ignore that the status quo inequality is already baked in, i.e. these institutions are already bad and unethical and violent. The app doesn't prevent them from becoming violent because they are the root cause of the violence they've conceded is the status quo in our Porter cards. Independently, that means that radical interdependence and abolishing that false dichotomy between those two groups is the only way to possibly resolve that impact. Only the K does it, makes the K try or die. The fact that the app doesn't do it means you can kick the K for us and vote neg on presumption. Lastly, or third is growth. I'll extend the greed link because that was just totally mishandled. It isn't only about cycles. It's about how the app has no endpoint. It just says we need infinite growth, or else we're going to have, or else we immediately have extinction. They have no endpoint in the entire debate for like when we have had enough growth. They've conceded a literal extinction impact just from that growth mindset. Jensen 4 literally says the only possible endpoint of that infinite growth mindset is just conceded extinction from destruction of the entire planet. That's just flat drop. You can vote on that probably right now. It seems pretty easy. Lastly, we're ahead on this democratic peace theory, where they've conceded my technical argument in the 2 and C that if we're right about the violent nature of the status quo, that sets an upper limit on how good the world post-Af can possibly be. The status quo is the U.S. intervention, U.S. violent action which ensures extinction in the status quo, so they don't act as an impact. On framework, they can test the act's consequences or ontological assumptions. It's a huge concession. Where's the answer to the Nirvana DA? All the 2 are is going to be nuclear. There's 2 components. First, based about fiat ensures zero policy failure. Starting from concepts and just and post facto causes zero policy failure. Only starting from a justification of ethics and then arriving at conclusions to create 2 pragmatic ways to interact with the world. Post facto justification always uses whatever ethics is convenient to suit its needs in order to promulgate its objectives. And that's a reason to reject the king, because it lets them say racist things in the debate. There's no defense of racist characterizations, but your ballot cannot affirm racism. Third, the endpoint of their education, enlightenment, and wisdom cannot be achieved by 3rd and 4th level testing, only by ethical analysis. They say fairness is attachment which causes suffering. The ballot's a reason to vote the F down, but the alt is dispassion. They also conceded the counterintuitive solves clash and fairness. They still get to weigh ethics. They say Buddhists use consequences. No, Buddhists evaluate disharmony and wisdom. They not suffering. We read 3 cards that all say that. That takes out the term. You cannot apply Buddhism. You have to start with Buddhism. That's the conceded imitation DA that was in the 2 and C that I read a whole card out of. It is flat brown. Their imitation of Buddhism is not enlightened. They say they don't have a burden to be enlightened. Yeah, they do. Enlightenment is conceded good. If conceded the alt is enlightenment. Only the alt access is an independent reason to vote neg. On ontology, they have no explanatory power over how suffering happens. Limiting contestation of that loses them debate. Remember, it's like saying psychoanalysis is wrong without saying reformism works. Choosing to believe ontology is also independently good and key and enlightened. That means no perma framework outweighs balance. On the links, I'll extend the delusion link. A lot of that was up in the overview. Those are all sufficient. I already did analysis around all of those term the case. I'll point out now that those are all basically conceded. None of the 1 AR was sufficient to answer those. Yeah, they say reject any delusions means vote after. We don't have an attachment to the ballot. We've presented a framework for how debate should operate. We think that if the decision can still decide between 2 different ethical frameworks.
It's a reason to put the app
It's
down.
a reason to put the app down. Conceding victory
The
means that I'm
only good
going to
desire is a
vote here.
desire for enlightenment.
Yeah, I did enough of the hedge debate. I'm going to go to that quote briefly. The most important argument here is our description of the status quo as violent. They aren't leading to more interventions. They have no basis for their predictions here in the world where we're winning fundamental illusions. But we're winning the status quo is violent. The status quo is U.S. intervention, probably in the end of the world. It looks like U.S. intervention in places like Taiwan, the SCS, which is an inevitable result of the maintenance of the status quo of U.S. kind. Even if that is sustainable, inevitably leads to extinction, which makes the K prior die.
It's so many, let's read it.
I was going to say Dallas Perkins. It's like
You just said it now. Say it again, dude.
Dallas loves Buddhism.
Dallas, and then around 8 of NDT, I signed off first.
So for Scott,
We were negged, and he announces it, he goes, "This is for real for the neg." I think the floor. And he goes, "I'm not mistaken, it's a 2-1 for the announces every part of the decision, including his own belly.
Brutal. So brutal.
Yeah, it was they were so.
I remember there was a kid, he debated, maybe their name was Bayer Walton's Slaves. That is like.
Anything with this. Finger,
Bayer.
little last name, first name.
Yep. It's a family.
Oh, yeah, you got a first name, last name, it's way more.
well, we can get another batch, yes.
I have no idea what you said. So,
Let me do that, let me just go.
just send me all that stuff. What it is.
How can I do it?
You got this. Just your head in the case.
Just look at. I got one institutional systems.
Okay. Case and okay. Is anyone not good? No. The 2 and R goes for a critique of ethics without a reason why the affirmative is undesirable under that ethical paradigm. Their valve consists of permutation that does not put down the 1EC, but rather endorses the A from a Buddhist perspective and takes their ethical applications and applies them to the 1EC because there's no mutual exclusivity. Negative valve is too risky because the conceded impacts the affirmative. You cannot vote negative because things being bad now does not mean you should let them get worse. The risk that they are wrong massively outweighs the risk that they are right because objection to the affirmative dooms everyone to mass suffering. Buddhists would agree with that valve because the way they determine the benefits and consequences of an action are about the relative amount of suffering it causes, and all of their link arguments are about false with the status quo and global structures that mere rejection of the affirmative cannot grapple with because the primary issue for the whole debate is that the 2 and R goes to the critique as if the alternative is to adopt a Buddhist method of ethics. It is not. It's just to reject the affirmative speech. They can't solve any of their warrants right. The world is bad now. Inequality undermines institutions. Growing academic consensus is that increase in inequality leads to elite capture the gears institutions away from positive long-term trajectories and undermines medical, scientific, and foreign policy preparedness. Decreases investment in public goods distribution causes global warming because we can't grapple with this reason accesses all of their offense, and the reason why they think the world is bad now because it's all magnified in a world of massive structural inequality. They don't have any inequality low now. Argument just means it's impossible for them to win. Their impact outweighs because they don't have any impact weakness. And we access the growth stuff. I did not need to really re-explain the impact here because they did not answer. Avoiding financial resilience causes war, causes nationalism and populism. The longer the crisis is sustained, it escalates and causes French ideas, massive structural violence and nuclear war. That's the center of pop-up evidence, which a 2 and R also does not get to. I do not need to reinvent the wheel because the risk is massive. Our evidence, the evidence is empirical. It means it proves that we're not delusional because both of the impacts I'm going for are based on empirical studies. They prove that we're right. The critique of frameworks up at the top do not explicitly try to framework to win the debate. One is these educational praxis proves that it's a good idea. It's necessary for students and debaters to make sure that their strategies do not cause war, but even if you weigh ethics, our ethics are better, and there's no fixed ethical attachment of the 1EC, but you should weigh the consequences of each advocacy over an academic vacuum or ethics. First is clash and link to loose record dogmatism and extractive civic research that calls this episodic humility and argumentative, which is crucial to extract the benefits of debate. The model that anything is unethical means you should direct lost people into an action because every proposal, regardless of how good it is, has some form of it that can be critiqued by different people, which means that they cause an action because they can't solve it if their impacts too is fairness. It's a game debate, it's a game strategy, returns pedagogy because there's a debate for because there's incentive for the ballot. Other frameworks are self-serving. They are also attached to the ballot too. If you attach it as bad, then they wouldn't ask for the ballot because the fact that which means you should vote out even if they would, because if they don't have attachment to the ballot, then why give it to them in the first place? There's no reason but negative just proves that this argument about attachment is ridiculous because there's no threshold for what we're attached to and what we're not. It's not a reason to stop people saying racist things debate argument, judges will pull people down if they're releasing the debate. It's not the same thing as saying the debate is like our job is not to be enlightened, just to prove that the affirmative is a good idea. It just means that the app could be better, not that the app is a bad thing, which does not mean the burden of return of the ethics first argument. It's bad. It means it seems to take any martial issue with the winning seat declared unethical, which I've said is that because you have to then either impact children or the app to never have any offense to it. The singularity argument, it's not offense to them because the winner does not answer the argument because the 2 and C card does not say anything that resembles an impact. It's not offense to them because the 2 and R does not explain what this argument is and why it causes extinction. It's also super far off because there's inherent value being alive and living another day is good. The alternative fails the 2 and R in speech. Like the opposite does on top of this, that's why it's not the same thing. The alternative does not directly from the permutation solves all their offense, doors with ethics and justification. The 2 and R do not make an explicit link argument, so you should either err on the side of caution when deciding if the app is hugely mutually consistent with their ideology. There's no nirvana. This have the way you have consequential justifications for why you should vote app that has different ones, but neither in the world of the app is a bad idea. The ontologists have reported they claim to be an alternative ethical paradigm for analyzing several of the one you see several problems. One, they have not explained why their vision of ethics is necessarily true. The argument that we also have detectable essence carries that the karma is not falsifiable, thus you should not base your decision confidence on, especially in the face of extinction. 2, Buddhists would disagree with their analysis. I did that stuff above about whether you should weigh the relative suffering. 3, anyone that's ever read a drop of Buddhist literature knows that the way you have decisions is by determining suffering, which means that's the hot evidence. You can conclude that the implementation of the app will reduce suffering, that the permutation value outweighs. You do not need perfect understanding of how suffering begins. However, the permutation that means the whole theology threshold being perfect, which is impossible and unfair to hold to that word. You cannot assume the word delusion without the way the affirmative is wrong. If you'll just the debate, evidence matters. They were determining broad ethical system explain rule, but that's definitely creating the bad. Another evidence talks about Buddhism on the case of a rule of heavy, which proves that they're just making broad assertions without any basis. You can't be 100% certain of anything, which means that if you're a bit more sure that we're right, even just a small degree that we're delusional, there's no actual impact with it. It's not static or descriptive. So you should still vote app. Delusion is not the same thing as violence. Writing on things as being delusional is what enables net more violence, because if they're right about what is delusional and what is not delusional, it's up to people to mass death, which means the rights that we are wrong, mass death always delusion is a status quo issue. Russia and China act in their best self-interest and try to prevent death. The alternate cannot resolve this. Nationalism self, the border evidence does not say anything about Buddhism at all. The debating on the head shows proof, which all do below that it is not inevitable. No, we are not wrong about inequality divisions or true people who are people. There are people with more money, people who have less money. That is not a bad thing to assume because those divisions are true. We need to act in the face of them. We solve inequality. There's no presumption. The only cause of domestic inequality is no poaching groups, enfranchisement, no coach solves them. That's a common evidence. And the 1AC, institutions being bad turns warming stuff too. The dichotomy is not false. The whole 1AC is based on the recent dichotomy. We need to reconcile. There's no breathing black at that point. It's not proof that growth is bad. And they're arguing about destruction. That's what's questioned by learning committees. Those risks, all the stuff about hedge. I don't spend a lot of time here because they're just making assertions about answering our arguments. They drop that they cannot solve decline. If the right decline is bad, the hegemony is bad. The hegemony is bad. The decline increases intervention. Just means that it's constrained now because they drop the Anderson Carbon case. A uniqueness argument that post-World War II intervention is largely constrained because institutions work and are successful. There's only risk that we solve that because they can't. They also drop the interventionism. It's not an absolute hegemony because they can play strategy and primacy, winning individual instances, which is all the 2 and R gets you. Does not prove that primacy is a broad strategy. It was not prove that primacy is large. The CMS and singularity stuff 1 year to the answer because the 2 and C card does not say anything that resembles an impact. The app does not increase nor decrease the probability of a post-human future. Either they're right about their ontology arguments and will become gods and deities no matter what, or it's not, and they'll still value the community and the intro because they have conceded that every single day we are allowed every moment of life is something that is inherently good and produces benefit, which means that the risk that they remove even a minute of somebody's life is a bad thing because all of their impacts are long-term profit future work not be solved by the alternative. So it's not worth risking a massive transition to set to it. The cause of the util stuff is completely irrelevant because the ethics stuff that they develop, they can't solve it either offense or there's no negative impact to the util stuff because they can't solve it.
We have card. We'll assemble a card now.
Sounds good.
Do you want cards from us?
Sure.
Have fun. Not assemble one.
I would like cards extended and then 2 are not in the card.